So where are we within this cycle then?
I mean, do you want the pessimistic view or the optimistic view?
I'd like both, actually.
So I think you can definitely read it as collapse of democracy because of corruption, in my opinion, and that democracy needs to be rescued. And I am very pro-democracy in the right format, and I want to rescue democracy. And that's why we've come up with this idea of what I call Vitruvian capitalism. And the idea really is that you can't have a healthy democracy unless you have a thriving middle class, because the middle class determines when the middle class is doing well, they get on with like adding value to society and being non-disruptive and generally towing the line, and everyone's happy, and income is distributed in a really, because like this idea of communism where everyone is like equal, that's just not ever going to work. And as a Pole, I am very much against communism. So the nearest thing you can get to sort of egalitarian society is a society that does have a small but dynamic and meritocratic billionaire class, as small as possible, an underclass, obviously, but with a lot of mobility between, so that there's at least opportunity to go up and down. But the middle class is like the bulk of, the whole system. And unfortunately, at the moment, we're hollowing out the middle class. So every single thing that's happening in terms of economic policy, politics, whatever, it's always the middle classes that are suffering. And that is what instability is made of. And one of the reasons for that, I think, is the tax system doesn't incentivize productive investment. And
there's a bit more than that. It's not just the tax system; it's the red tape as well.
Yes, 100%.
As a business owner, I own multiple businesses now. I mean, I'm just buying a bar at the moment, which I'll own in 10 days. The amount of things,
cool.
You would say so, but
completely agree.
But like all the different licenses and things I have to do to run this bar, I was like, Jesus, this is a bar that has like 200 people go to it.
Well, this is what happened in like communism. Like everything was a bureaucracy, because every layer of bureaucracy is an opportunity for a take.
Yeah.
And so we've just like,
sorry to interrupt. I think it was so I made a film on inflation, and I think it was Dominic Frisby said to me that to destroy a society, I think it was he said that Lenin said to destroy a society you have to hollow out the middle class.
That sounds plausible.
Yeah, I think it was that. It was either Lenin or Stalin. I can't remember.
But it sounds like the sort of thing they'd say.
but I'm with you. You are seeing this, but the tax system is awful. But it is the red tape. But we have gone to that point now where I know plenty of families. It's both parents are working, both have what you would consider good jobs, and both are finding it quite hard or seeing them pushed to the limits. And I used to grow up thinking when they talked about the middle class, I said, why is everyone focused on the middle class? Shouldn't we be focused on the working class? I didn't realize the importance of a middle class to a well-functioning society.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And we've forgotten about the working classes entirely, in my opinion, as well. So there's collateral damage across the spectrum. And so we've got this sort of like Versailles situation where there's a small global elite who are imposing all sorts of, the system, for me, it's USSR 2.0. So that's my worst case scenario, is that we're on the verge of USSR 2.0, which stems from the same problems in the sense there's too much centralization, there's too much bureaucracy, there's too many people on the take, everything's a bezel, everyone is working in a de facto nationalized company, because half of a lot of your listeners are not going to like this, but I think there's a hell of a lot of tech startups that are just bullshit, who if they are successful and get loans from Silicon Valley Bank or whatever, is, how many of them, especially in the UK, are doing it because they get government contracts. I mean, the PPE scandal is a great example of this, the government isn't really nationalizing stuff or owning things, but they give out these contracts, which basically can make or break little companies. So if you get a government contract, you're quids in. But if you don't get a government contract, you can't compete with those people who have, right? Mm-hmm. So, and then you've got this, the bank obviously gives the money to the startup with the government contract. But how do you get that contract? Through your connection. So it's all kind of like nefarious.
And how does the banks now get their money?
Well, exactly. And by the way, who's the bank owned by now? Like, HSBC. And ultimately that's now a Chinese bank.
And if they backstop all bank money, banks can take as much risk as they like, lend in as much out as they want. None of it makes any fucking
Which is
sense.
exactly, and essentially, so this is the column I'm actually writing this minute is this has just made something that is explicit, which is that the banking system has been nationalized and since 2008, and we've just been pretending it isn't. And because it's nationalized, like with any socialist system, like in USSR, the state is not capable of making productive investments because it always ends up like profiteering on it, allocating wealth to people who are in the little, ruling elite. And so that ends up misallocating capital and taking it away from productive investments that can actually make a difference to this world and things that everyday middle class people really want, and allocating them to whatever the elites want. In this case, it's all ESG stuff, right? Which ultimately are value destructive for everybody because they're a mechanism by which, it's for the sake of the planet, but some of these things are completely ridiculous and have nothing to do with the planet. So,
well, look, I completely agree. In the latest budget, there was nothing in there for me at all. And that's not me as a selfish person saying, what's in it for me? There was just nothing in there for me. As a business owner, corporation tax is going up soon. So that means I'm going to have less money to invest. I've got increasing red tape, increasing licenses. My ability to do business is getting harder. The minimum wage is going up, which, by the way, it's not that I oppose to paying higher wages, but it's another cost. In buying this bar, I've got. I know there's a big increase in the heating, the electric that's coming to this business because it's previously on a fixed price deal. It's getting harder and harder to do business, but nothing in the budget was. I did an interview with this guy called Dan Tubb, and he told me about how the government's going 100 billion over budget every year. There was nothing in this budget that said, "Well, we're going to cut back as government here." Government continues to grow. It continues to grow, and we're continually pouring money into every
under
different
conservative government. On top of that,
yes, interesting enough, but they're not a conservative government.
No,
they're
I
a
agree.
They're a blue Blair Labour basically, and
it's like that Bill Hicks sketch. Do you prefer the psycho on the left or the psycho on the right? They're both like they're the same thing.
But Dan Tubb referred to it as the governments are now insurance brokers. They basically provide insurance for any mistake that anyone can make in society, whether it's health insurance or it's pension insurance or it's welfare insurance. And we cannot afford to do this. And the point being is that, look, I think I'm a good allocator of capital. I've created multiple businesses. Take the handcuffs off and let me do it.
Exactly. If you had a government contract, you'd also have to pass an EQI score. Do you know about this?
No.
Okay, so
Equality?
So there's now this push for like any government contracts, have to be given to companies that meet a certain score on EQI, and I don't know exactly the criteria, but it's like a diversity and whatever green, I don't know, whatever policies the government wants to pursue, and
that's very progressive for conservative government.
Except. The funny thing is, the only people who can score you are like a handful of little agencies that exist. Like there are only like a handful of them, and they all have to be like with the people. Like when we all had to get our vaccine tests, and there was like a list of approved suppliers.
Yeah.
So the same thing. It's like approved like people who do the score, and there's not enough of them. There's like councils everywhere who need these scores, and because there aren't enough of these approved suppliers, like to get a score, if you're a little startup, it's like £100,000 for a score, which is an insane amount of money to waste on a score to evaluate how something that can be like common sense can evaluate, and then and there's no logic to as far as I understand, there's no logic to how they do these assessments, and the reason. So I know a startup who was trying to they did get a government contract, and they were they had to do this score to get the actual money, and what ended up happening is they couldn't believe they'd been quoted 100,000. They're just a little startup. They're like, we can't afford this. And the government department was like, well, it's okay, we'll pay it for you then, don't worry. And they were like, no one should be paying it. It's ridiculous. He's like, how come it's this much anyway? He goes, because all these councils have to do it and they've just driven the price up because there's not enough suppliers. And this to me is just like rampant, obvious, like bezel by the, like, it's the same thing as in communism. You have these like corrupt, apparatchiks who are sitting in the system and just taking money for creating stupid like positions that don't do anything. Just
this is the pessimistic view, right? This is not the optimistic view.
No, this is the pessimistic view.
So what's the optimistic view?
The optimistic view, I hope,
yes,
is that we recognize these problems. And frankly, and this is where I got a lot of heat on Twitter, like, this is going to sound mad, but Liz Truss, I was not a fan of Liz Truss. Really not a fan. To be honest, I didn't know that much about her. I'd not read her book. But if anyone, we have to do something. And that was a better option than, we have to try and do something to revive our productivity. And at this moment, it's like, I don't know, it's like in some sort of sci-fi drama where you're being pulled into a black hole. And you can either stay on that course, or you can do something like, then suddenly Tom Cruise comes in and it's like, yeah, no, but I have this like crazy plan. And it involves actually leaning into the black hole, but to use the energy to propel ourselves outwards, And yes, we could die, but at least we've got a 1% chance of like surviving. Right? Oh. And that's what I think. And I think Liz Truss was that kind of slingshot maneuver. Mm-hmm. And we just killed it.
Well, so look, I don't know enough about why the policy failed, why the bond market crashed afterwards. I've heard rumors that was
By the way, the pound is one of the strongest performing currencies in the last quarter.
In the last quarter, yes. But it hasn't been in the last year and a half. Compared to the dollar. So I am always aware compared to the dollar because all my sponsors pay in dollars. So, when the pound crashed, I essentially made more money, and as it rises, I make less. But there were suspicions that there was a coordinated crashing of the gilt market because people didn't like her policies. But when they were announced, they were very traditional conservative policies. Lower tax, stimulate growth.
I think it was a media. We're going back to media. One of the problems is media people, and this is where I, criticize myself. I do it. I'm guilty because we're all guilty of it. And I think you have to acknowledge your own role in it to be able to fix the problem. And it's a psychological problem, which means that we all want to be first to a big take. And it's like any mind hack. Like you see something and you're like, yeah, the headline proves my point. Therefore, and then you don't reach the bottom and you share it and you haven't actually done the research, but it's confirmation bias like on steroids, right? And so I don't think people do it on purpose. I just think it's a psychological disposition of everyone. And in the trust situation, everyone was like immediately, oh, well, OBR says it's bad, therefore it must be bad. But actually, if you read Truss's interview post that event, nobody told her about the LDIs. Okay, fine, maybe that was a problem, and there should be better communication. But fundamentally, was that really that big a sin? Like, under COVID, we passed unfunded budgets, and it's quite clear we're going to monetize the debt at this point. So all this was about monetizing of the debt. This is going to happen. Anyone who can read the markets can see we are going to monetize the debt. In fact, Silicon Valley Bank, the whole debacle this week and last week shows you we are going to monetize the debt. Like, it's just the Fed is taking loans at par, which means they're trying to pretend that they haven't, it's an impossible situation. Just by raising rates, they are killing the value of their own bonds and then pretending they're not.
Don't you sometimes think perhaps having this centralized interference is the problem?
I think in this case, demonstrably, yes. And so what happened with Truss is that she just made something implicit, potentially explicit, which is that we were going to monetize the debt. But if you monetize the debt, it's like during a war. Like in emergency scenarios, it's okay, providing you invest it properly and actually get your productivity up. And if you can create growth, it's that slingshot maneuver. But the kind of usual voices on Twitter were like, oh no, because like how dare she, like tax cuts, blah 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 for the rich and not for. But when you actually deconstruct what she was doing, the tax cuts were for PAYE. How many rich people do you know pay themselves through PAYE? Like the billionaires, do you think they paid through like PAYE?
But they will pay themselves £1 usually.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so it wasn't for the billionaires. The PAYE tax cut was actually for the very people who talked themselves into the idea that she was doing them a bad service, because it was the lawyers, the kind of not the self-employed, the professional classes that take a salary, the people who work at Deloitte, at McKinsey, people who draw salaries, who live in the commuter belt of London, are the people who would have benefited from that tax cut. And they're the ones with the biggest mortgages, which would have hurt them, like interest rates will hurt them the most. And so this was basically throwing them a bone, which they then threw back at her. And so I think that was a really big blunder for us in the UK. And now we have, I don't know. I suspect in the long run, we will realize that everyone's going to do what Trusted was proposing anyway.